Ooh, we are live, Lisa.
We're live. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you, and also just happy Friday to all of those that are watching later because we're recording this, or people that are going to be coming into the room in a moment. And what we're really doing here is this is part of our ongoing monthly events, always on the first Friday, where Lisa and I spend an hour talking about various concepts of our work and how that can help us to be more effective in our leadership, in our life. And today the topic is really moving from dysfunction to excellence, and how it is that we can bring out the best in our team and the people that we're working with. And whether we have direct reports, which some of you do, or you're an individual contributor, we're all leaders in some form, leaders in our family, leaders in our community, leaders in our work. So how do we do that and be more effective at doing that? That's really the topic today.
Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, I see people coming in.
Tell us where you're joining from. We want to be with you. Where are you joining from? What are you looking forward to in our conversation about the shift from dysfunction to excellence? Tell us all the things. We want to know where you are this Friday afternoon.
At the very least, we'd just love to hear where you're calling in from, so we can ground in that. It's interesting, when we were preparing this, Lisa, I remember we were thinking about how we're doing this in the backdrop of the Olympics, and there's all these amazing accomplishments, athletes, they're really digging deep. And I mean, talk about doing your best or bringing out the best in somebody. It's just really inspiring. And all of those athletes, when you think about it, they're part of a team, and they're responding to their leaders, and they're also becoming leaders or are already leaders in their own right. And they get a lot of their support to coaches, mentors, friends, and family. So there's a bunch of stuff that goes into doing and being our best. And today we're going to look at one of the ways to do that, bringing out the best in ourselves and others. And we're going to introduce a concept to help us notice and understand ways that we might be contributing to the stress and tension on a team that's ultimately dysfunctional and disheartening. How can we be an influence for good and collaborate even when others, and maybe especially when others that we encounter are challenging or not necessarily people that we're naturally inclined to work with or feel comfortable around. So that's what we're up to. And again, welcome people that are coming in. We'd love to see your name in the chat to welcome you. And we'll do some introductions ourselves. So Lisa, why don't you go first? What would you like us to know about you?
Yeah, sure. So welcome again, everyone. My name is Lisa Smalling. I'm an executive coach. I am part of the wonderful team at Learning is Leadership, where I support with facilitation and coaching and culture change. I also am a skills trainer, and I spent a long time, as you'll hear throughout this call, I spent a long time in leadership and about 10 years or so in hospitality. So I'll get into a little bit of a story about what that looked like in a few.
Great. Nice to have you here. And my name is Linda Curtis. I'm a colleague of Lisa's. We came on board at Learning is Leadership at the same time and went through our training together. So we bonded in that way. And I'm here because I really love these conversations about how to be more effective. I think there's a lot of ways we get in our own way without even realizing it. I know I do that often enough. And most of the clients that I work with that are looking for how to be a more effective leader know that there are certain things they're doing, they're getting in their own way, but they're not exactly sure how to do it differently or why they might actually be behaving that way in the first place. And so we get to the root of those things in these kinds of conversations. And I don't know, I find that inspiring. And so I'm really glad to be here. As you know, we've been doing these as part of a series, and this particular conversation, invite you to hold it as a two-part conversation. So we hope you'll come back for the second half, which will be on September 8th. As many of you know, the focus of our work at Learning is Leadership is in identifying the self-worth concerns of the ego. When a self-worth concern arises, for example, like, oh, am I smart enough? Do people here respect me? Am I seen as capable in this situation? Whether we have those concerns consciously or unconsciously, the ego's need to protect itself from those concerns can cause us to react in ways that have profound effect on other people. So if we can identify or notice that pattern, it requires first that we understand the mechanism, like why does this happen? And so in our seminars that we have on a semi-annually basis, this is something we explore deeply. And if this is a new concept to you, you could also go and read the Ego-Free Leadership book to better understand our work. That's something you can order off of our website. But today, the focus is on growing an awareness of what happens, how this happens in our life and work. Not to really shift anything, but just first start catching on to what is it that we're doing when we are contributing to the stress and tension in a team. Lisa, you want to introduce the concept that we're sharing today?
Yeah. This is a concept that's near and dear to me. Like I said a few minutes ago, I spent a long time leading teams, pretty much my entire career in different capacities. And, like we were talking about with the Olympics, like I feel like I've led winning teams and, championship teams and all that. And I've also had dysfunctional teams. So if you've led long enough, you've had your share of both.
Mm-hmm.
And you may not want to admit it, just like me, but I've contributed to both sets of results. And so we want to start the conversation really talking about the first part, the dysfunction, before we get to the excellence. And we're introducing this concept, which we define it as there's a set of interpersonal behaviors that either undermine or fail to empower in some way or dishearten, others in their full potential. So it's not bringing out the best in another person, in your team members. And this is a concept called making others bad. That's the term that we have internally for it. And when we're talking about bad, we're not talking about in a moral sense. We're talking about, again, a set of behaviors that don't bring out the best in others. So it's not like we're saying you're a bad person or there's a judgment on it in that way, but it's more about, okay, what are the sets of behaviors and how am I showing up for this team that could be a limiter or derailer? So that's what we're going to talk about first.
Well, I think, and I love that, and I consider that a great recap of what it is that we're doing for those of you that are just joining us, and welcome you to the call. As Lisa said, we're shining a light on how making bad works. Sometimes others make us bad, and sometimes we make others bad. I like how you said that, Lisa. If you've been leading long enough, you've been on both sides of this, and we'll talk about how that plays out in a moment. But recognizing this tendency really is the first step. Recognizing when we're doing it to others or when it's being done to us, this is a first step in learning how to shift out of it and ultimately contribute to whatever is going on in a way that's aligned with what you care about, what your goals and visions are for whatever the endeavor is you're doing. A reminder to those of you, this is a conversation. So we invite you to join us with comments, questions in the chat as we go. We're both monitoring that. And I would encourage you, this is also a good time to grab a piece of paper for an exercise that we're going to do in a moment, or even open a blank doc on your device. Just a super brief exercise, but in a moment, you're going to have a chance to explore ways that you do this. And the invitation is to bring curiosity and self-honesty, not self-judgment so much. We don't need to make ourselves bad for various ways that we behave, but just to bring a kind of honesty and curiosity about, how does this apply to me? So first, what does dysfunction look like? What does it look like in your work world? What does it look like in my work world? I'd invite you at this moment to make a list on that piece of paper or whatever you have there, a list of 3 people. You can just even think of 3 people that might come to mind from your life, your team, your work. And these would be people that don't bring out the best in you. you would just say, yeah, that boss, that colleague, that direct report, that mentor, or that person just never really got the best out of me. There was something about the way that they showed up where I always felt or left disheartened. It was a challenging relationship. Probably not hard to have three names come to mind. And you might also just want to think, what did those various people do? What behaviors or actions came along that occurred that impacted you negatively? And fortunately for us, Lisa's going to give us an example. She's going to share some experiences from her own work and leadership, so that we can create this shared definition of what the behaviors are. So you can start to recognize what are the behaviors that might lead to team dysfunction. What does making others bad look like? So you have a sense of how you can use this framework and start to shift. Notice when that's happening so it can be shifted. So Lisa, who is on your list and what specific behaviors or things did they do that were challenging for you?
I have to say, Linda, I had a hard time just sticking with three. I've got a few, so we'll see. I might share a couple extra. But let me stick with three, just to get a sense of what we're talking about here. So one person I have is a former boss. And this boss, in terms of behavior that didn't get the best out of me, they would actually kind of make comments that I perceived as criticism or critical comments and judgments, things that just weren't helpful. Instead of giving me actionable feedback, they'd criticize me or they point out mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also corrected me in front of others in meetings. So that didn't work for me. I also have on my list a former colleague. This colleague is someone probably some of you can relate, and drop it in the chat if so. This colleague failed to include me on important communications. And these were communications where I happened to be the subject matter expert. So I'd be humming along and I'd find out later that there were these updates or things were happening and I was not in on the information. I also had a colleague, talking about me to other colleagues instead of talking to me directly when issues arose, making jokes at my expense. Some of us have been in those kind of toxic environments where the culture isn't the best, and I've had that. And then I also had on my list a former direct report. This person is someone who failed to follow instructions as provided. They kind of go off on their own way.
Mm-hmm.
And then more recently, I actually have a prospective client on my list. And what happened in that situation was they ghosted me. And if you work in an industry where you provide a service and you're connecting with folks and you get leads, you probably have been ghosted time or two, right? And after they the commitment, they're all bought in, and then all of a sudden it's crickets. And so I have that on my list. That also doesn't bring out the best in me.
Wow, that's pretty great. So, participants, if you are here and you're listening to this, it sounds really familiar to me. I think these are great examples. And maybe if you have some examples of behaviors or things that have happened to you from your list of three, feel free to put them in the chat. Lisa, what I was thinking about when you were sharing those is there's really like two different kinds of actions there. Some are very active. Mm-hmm. For example, if somebody's correcting you in front of your team, that would be very uncomfortable for me as well. I'd find that kind of embarrassing, and I would feel a little diminished. I'd prefer that be in private. But anyway, that would be an example of something that's very active. Also criticizing, you mentioned, or talking about you with others instead of like coming to you directly. We would consider those active. Other examples could be being sarcastic, getting into debate mode with somebody. So like really get into I'm right, and not having any curiosity, but just being in really a debating or convincing mode. Those would be kind of active behaviors that could have a negative impact. But then you also talked about some that are really passive. Ghosting, you mentioned, just being excluded from meetings. So anytime we get into silently judging somebody, withholding our support or avoiding any sort of conflict, if somebody's doing that towards us, or we're doing that, we're kind of falling into this kind of a passive kind of behavior. So what were the impacts for you? I mean, how did this all make you feel? How did this play out in the work environment?
Not great. So these are a couple different settings, but I'll just go through each scenario. I think with the former boss, to the impact to me, I was often feeling insecure, especially in group settings. I didn't know what was going to happen at any given moment. I just kind of felt disheartened, down on myself. And I really spent a lot of time in a churn or a swirl. I was trying to understand, like, what did they mean by the comments that they were making? If it's not feedback, like, is there a certain way that I need to perform? And am I not up to par? Like, I didn't have guidance or support. And so it just left me feeling kind of lost at times, honestly. With the former colleague, I definitely had feelings of frustration. It created strained relationships, and we started to get into different camps. There were like almost like the Mean Girls. It was that situation all over again in the workplace. And that definitely didn't work. With the direct report, so those are the things that, like, the last ones kind of impacted me. The direct report situation, it really more so impacted like our customer or the business, the bottom line. It reduced the customer confidence. Like, there were a series of things that happened that impacted customers. We had low ratings, reviews, like there were delays, there was poor output. So there was a lot with that. So there was just this larger impact to the team, to the organization as a whole. And then finally, the prospective client situation, I think those were also for me feelings of frustration, just kind of like this energy of like, I'm so attached to the outcome. Like, at this stage in the process, I'm kind of with an assumption like we're at the end of this thing. So I'm attached to the outcome a bit. And I was, in this space of like, not knowing what to do, like a relationship, like this desperation energy almost. Like, we were in this together, and now I'm out here in the wind by myself.
Yeah.
So that's not a great feeling.
No, and you're so good. And if you're just joining us, listeners or participants, we're talking about dysfunctions in a team and how we can notice how those start so we can really begin to bring out the best in ourselves and others. And you have just totally described textbook team dysfunction. And let us remember that this all came from certain behaviors that evoked a concern, a self-worth concern in you. And that played out not just for you in feeling diminished, but also, it seems like there were a whole bunch of other people in different directions up and down the chain of this connectedness that were negative and harmful. I can't say people were, or you, like even just your own experience, you felt like you were being, the best of you was being evoked by these different circumstances. So, I'm wondering if this sounds familiar to our listeners. I mean, it certainly does to me. I want to emphasize as we talk about this concept of making others bad. Again, this is not a moral kind of bad. It isn't amoral to vent to another person or avoid conflict or roll your eyes to emphasize your displeasure. We've all been guilty of things like that. But we can say it's bad because it's not really a path to bringing out the best in others. So the impact, the cost, how it plays out is bad. And it just keeps us farther and farther away from realizing what it is that we really want. What is our goal here? What is our aspiration? So it really kind of slows things down. So, Lisa, back to your examples. What you've just shared with us was an example of ways that you were disheartened by others. So where you felt others were making you bad, or in other words, not bringing out the best in you. It's harder to see when we're doing this whether it's consciously or unconsciously, to others. So to help us illustrate this, thank you so much. You've decided to share a story of your own experience in this. So do tell.
Okay, so I spent about 10 years in hospitality and food service. I did all the things. I did catering, I worked in restaurants, I did private events, you name it. People have been asking me lately if I watched The Bear, if it was like that. I'm only on episode 2, so I can't tell you one way or another.
Hopefully not. That would be really hard.
I don't know. Stay tuned. In the next conversation, I'll catch up. So I worked as a general manager for a number of years in that space. And sometimes I would have to kind of, isn't there a Rescue 911 show where someone comes in and rescues the operation? I sometimes would be in that space where I'd come in and have to take over in a new space. So I was working in a big restaurant group as a general manager, right? And I was being brought in as a replacement for someone who was on their way out. And I knew that, the team knew that was well established beforehand. They were moving to another state, and they'd been with the team for about 5 years in this restaurant location. And so the idea was that I'd come in 1 month before they exit. We'd work together for a month. That would help ease the transition. I kind of learned the lay of the land from them. Their name was Jamie, by the way. And I was to shadow Jamie and learn about their approach to daily operations. And so we were trying to make it smooth, right? A smooth, complete transition. Once they transitioned out, I'd bring in assistant managers and then, run with it from there, right? I was like coming in there ready to build that high performance Olympic level team, okay? And let me backtrack a little bit more context. So some of you know me, that are watching, and some of you don't. I'm Afro-Latina. My family is of Panamanian descent, right? And this is important context to know for this story. I grew up with my family internalizing certain biases and hearing gossip and some of the unhealthy behaviors from folks who were of other Central and South American ancestry. So, it was, I hate to admit it, but those of you that know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. So, I would grow up hearing my dad talk about folks from different countries and his experience with them and his elitism point of views about Panama, right? So, of course, I unconsciously internalized some of that. And Jamie happened to be from a country that my dad would have thoughts about and verbalize his thoughts often. And so, although, not consciously and not intentionally, I had bias towards Jamie, knowing this. So I'm like, oh, Jamie's from this country. And I already know how Jamie is in my mind, right? So immediately I kind of boxed Jamie in. And, suffice it to say, I was like, oh, I already know. Like, they're arrogant, they're aloof, they're self-absorbed. You could tell, look how they, walk into the space, look how they are. So you couldn't tell me I didn't know Jamie. Like, as soon as I learned, that first day, like, oh, where are you from? How long have you been doing this? Oh, you live here, all that. You couldn't tell me. And so I had my assumptions, I had my biases, I had all the things that were already starting me off down a path. So you can kind of see where this is going, right? Now, right before, I was supposed to be learning from Jamie, right? And we worked in a restaurant, long hours. You work crazy hours in restaurants. I can't even explain to you how crazy it is. But Jamie worked from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And that's pretty unheard of in this role in restaurants. And so it was really hard for Jamie and I to have enough overlap outside of peak times where, our restaurant was packed full of folks. Like we couldn't really engage the way we were meant to. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that level of transition and getting to know Jamie and the opportunity to overlap, like that really didn't happen. Add to that one more piece. So I've already got my bias, which was unconscious and partly conscious, let's be honest. I already had that. the fact that Jamie and I didn't actually have a full shift of overlap. Now, add to that the fact that in my eyes, the condition of the restaurant was not up to par. So the food quality, the service, all the things, it was not up to the standards that I would expect or appreciate in a service that I'm running. And so there was that created another level of judgment. And then the nail in the coffin was this. Jamie had hired a number of family members to work.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, it was kind of common knowledge, not necessarily to the managing group of the restaurants, but like locally, it was common knowledge. So Jamie had, I'm talking cousins, in-laws, personal friends, Jamie's entire network was in this restaurant, okay? And that created a lot of things, and an in-group and out-group was one of the things. There were a group of folks, language barriers between groups. There was all kind of dynamics that were unproductive. Half of them were like, the family group dynamic, the cultural dynamic. It was a lot. So all that to say, hopefully that painted a clear picture. Like I had my work cut out for me.
Yeah, this is a juicy example. I gotta say, you got a lot of stuff going.
It was a lot. And then trying to just deal with a restaurant itself, like it was a lot. So
Right.
you can tell based on how I'm describing the situation, hopefully you can tell, like you can see where this is going. This is gonna lead to some ways that there was dysfunction on this team.
I would say, and I'm totally tracking with you because all of that, even just your mindset would lead to some issues. So
Yeah, totally.
if we're watching you now, like if we're all watching you during this time period, what would we see? What behaviors did you start falling into?
Okay.
And
So the
you now
behavior-
tell on yourself.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm not proud. So just, this is a safe space, right? Like hold a safe space with me, and I'll just be 100% honest here. Well, the first thing was whenever we had like team meetings, group meetings, weekly catch-ups, all the things, I went in with pretty low expectations. I already knew Jamie was not going to contribute. I had my mind made up, like, okay, well, Jamie's probably not even going to be on the meeting, so I guess I need to speak for both of us. So there was already that. That was kind of a passive to what you were saying earlier, right?
Mhm.
Passive behaving.
Mhm.
I did not ask questions or explore things with Jamie. I pretty much ignored and judged Jamie, to be honest, the whole time. I had written Jamie off. Like once I saw this 9 to 4 schedule and kind of the energy and space that they were in, I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm on my own. I also vented quite a bit, probably every day, if I'm being honest. I vented to peers. I had peers that went through the same training that I did. And so I'd call them and can you believe? And they're not even here. It's this time. It was a mess. I also, I would throw Jamie under the bus a little bit with my supervisor. Like I would make it clear, oh, did you all know the restaurant was being run this way? Did you all know that these things were happening? I'm like shocked that this is what's going on here, So I was not an advocate for Jamie. And then I just kind of dismissed them. Like after 2 weeks, I was like, well, they're checked out. I'm not bought in the first place. It's whatever. And then finally, when there were employees who were kind of in the out group and they'd come and express concerns or complain, I really didn't do anything to interrupt it. I just kind of like let it be in the space. So I wasn't being helpful. And I also was just like perpetuating the toxicity that was already there. So I was adding to the dysfunction, needless to say. And I'll say this. So here's the thing. It's not like I was waking up consciously choosing every day to make Jamie bad, right? I wasn't thinking like, oh, I'm going to judge Jamie today at 3 p.m. Like it didn't happen that way. So what we teach and what we understand through our methodology about the work on the ego system For those of you that are new to our methodology and the self-worth system of the ego, what happens is that my ego was triggered in this situation. All of us have an ego system that responds in whatever way it does based on our context, right? And so what was happening is I was triggered. This is way before I had done this work, so I had no knowledge of this at the time. I was feeling internally threatened and I was in reaction. So I was getting into these default modes where my ego felt the need to either protect myself. So there were some behaviors that were in response to needing to protect myself and distance myself. And then there were other behaviors where I needed to prove, like I needed to show some level of superiority, most likely, because that's where my ego can go when I'm in that space. But it was my way of being in reaction, and trying to keep myself safe. Like the ego is invested in being safe, being right, being in control, all of those things. Those were the things that were happening when I was in these behaviors.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can imagine, you described this story, and there's this 30-day period where you overlap that you is built into the transition. And I can imagine on like a conscious level, you go, oh, this is challenging. I'm just going to ride this out. I'm just going to just get these 30 days behind me and then I'll be in charge and I can take over and do it my way.
Yep.
In reality, there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on in the surface you're pointing to, just concerns that were arising that then caused you to respond in these ways that, making bad, which is also very unskillful. When we make others bad, there's just kind of a lack of skill that we're really bringing to this. And so I guess I have to ask you, how did this play out? What were the impacts here? What did you see as the end result of all of this for you, for Jamie, for everybody?
Right. So you want me to tell you about the dysfunction, the impacts?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh man, now we're getting juicy. Okay, so the first thing is let's deal with the bias situation. And I didn't say this, but actually, oh gosh, it just gets so deep. There were times I mentioned that I was venting to peers. I was also venting to my dad. So I would call my dad and vent as well, and that was just super unhelpful. So the piece about my bias and his bias, like that was just crazy. So the impacts of that, I couldn't expand, my own context, my box, my bias, right? I was just reinforcing it every day. And so I was forming limiting beliefs. I was just buying into these unhelpful narratives, and everything was just another data point. My dad was feeling righteous, and so was I. So that was number one. I couldn't adopt the learning mindset that I intended to go in there with. When you're in a new space, when I'm in a new space, I need to get the lay of the land. I want to understand the team dynamics. I want to, be on board with the vision of the company, like all the things. That was out the window from the beginning. So I didn't know at the time because I didn't take the time to ask because I'm doing all this other stuff. Jamie was hitting financial targets. Jamie was exceeding expectations. On paper, the restaurant was super successful and setting the tone for the area that it was in. And I didn't bother to explore like what contributed to that or what were the metrics. None of that. I wasn't concerned with any of that. So I struggled later on once I started getting to the numbers. I was really struggling. So there's that. I didn't capitalize on Jamie's strength and influence and experience in that space. Like, had I partnered with Jamie, I probably would have gotten buy-in a lot faster. They would have helped me influence the team. I would have understood what was important to the team without having to do all this extra work. Like, oh my gosh, I can, hindsight, right? At 2020 hindsight. I also add to this, I was coming in every day with frustration, with stress, with exhaustion from the day before. Like it wasn't fun, Most of my time in restaurants, like it's fun. That's what makes it not as hard and, laborious because we're having fun most of the time. I was not having fun at this situation for a very long time. I was missing opportunities to collaborate. I was ultimately less effective than I could be. And the reality is, it took a long time to get people on track where I had done this before. I mentioned that, right? I had gone into a restaurant, taken over, and, did all the things. This is a process that should have taken about 3 months to have this transition and to have it be smooth. It actually took closer to 9 months.
Wow. Yeah. 3 times longer.
Right. And I was working long hours during this time. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if we were looking at an 8 to, if I work 9 to 4, like Jamie, let me not, sorry, Jamie, I don't want to make you bad again. If I, if I was working in a normal setting, I mean, we could just round it up to a year at that point, based on the hours I was putting in.
Yeah.
So, I wasn't reaching targets for half of my tenure there. And it was a lot.
Yeah.
So, it was a lot.
Yeah. Making others bad. This is how it plays out, like you said, you didn't wake up and say, how can I judge him or make him bad? But you start falling into these behaviors and, they're compelling in a way. And we'll talk a little bit about why we do this, but could you just say a little bit more about what you could imagine the cost to Jamie might have been? I mean, I could imagine if I was in that position, not making excuses for any of his bad behavior, but feeling judged, someone's assuming negative intent. I don't know where I don't know. How do you think that played out for him?
It's a great question. And I'll be honest, I didn't think about Jamie at the time. I didn't think about Jamie and the impact to Jamie for a long time, and so I think it's largely like what you said. For me at the time, it was like, oh, they're on their way out. Like, they don't care. But I think honestly, when I'm not putting in 100% of my effort, or especially when I'm engaged in the behaviors I just spoke about, the people pick up on that. They don't know exactly what's happening, but they know something is happening. There's a vibe here, we're not connected. So I imagine it probably had Jamie back on their heels a little bit, feeling judged, feeling inadequate in some way, wanting to leave at 4. Maybe like there was no incentive to stay and help me because of how I was showing up. I wouldn't stay. So I don't know for sure, but if I flipped the tape, if I flipped it, like Jamie was probably as uncomfortable as I was. And then I never even thought about the fact that Jamie was leaving to a new space, that Jamie was leaving family members, Jamie, like this whole thing that they created for 5 years. I don't know, maybe that was unsettling or hard for them in some way. I honestly didn't even give it a thought.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're touching on like there's the cost to Jamie. I mean, whatever that stress was, but there was definitely, he's going to be impacted. You mentioned the team a little bit, because it does affect everybody in the environment. We've all been in situations where common leaders have tension between them, and here we're observing that, and it does have an impact. Anything more you want to say about that? Because team members basically start choosing sides, and there's that us versus them dynamic that kind of gets stronger and stronger sometimes.
Absolutely. That definitely happened here. And I'm curious, like, put in the chat. We want to hear from you all as well. How are you relating to this? And, what are some of the ways that you've made others mad? Like, don't let me be out here on my own. Tell us how you're relating to this. Okay. So we'll look for your comments as we go. But yeah, I mean, it to your point, like in my mind, my behaviors were more passive, and I wasn't, verbally responding to Jamie in any way. So I didn't think it had an impact, right? But to your point, of course it does. We're all in an experience together. We're all on a team together. So if one person is having an experience, we're all having an experience. And so I think what I noticed and observed, so part of it was it wasn't an easy transition. So the obvious, it was not smooth for anyone. There were mixed messages with team members about the way that things should be. You know, people were afraid of like, am I going to come in here and get on my own agenda and my own high horse and change everything? Like they felt comfortable and safe in the space they were in, and so now they were unsettled. And there was definitely a lot of, again, the group dynamics, like choosing sides, and it was this way before, and Jamie said this is fine, and I don't have, like, it was just a mess. So it was uncomfortable for the team. Absolutely. Very dysfunctional for everyone.
Yeah. So what you are really showing us a dysfunctional environment. I think all of us can relate to aspects of this story as either the person on the receiving end of being made bad, being criticized or cut out or silently judged. We can always feel it when that's happening. And you're also things where you are actually the one that was making someone else bad and not doing anything to contribute in a way that would create or eliminate that stress, that disconnect, and allow people to feel safe. You're reminding me just totally off the cuff of one CEO that used to talk about cordial hypocrisy in teams, and you're kind of describing that like everybody's nice and polite to one another, but underneath there's a lack of respect or care that's really going on, and it affects the whole environment. So that's really interesting. So I guess one of the things that'd be good to point to here, Lisa, and what your reflections might be on this. Why does this matter? I mean, why do we care so much about the impacts and costs? I mean, who cares how it affected Jamie? Who cares it affected the team? You had a hard time. Why does it matter that we might do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a couple of things. And again, I want to connect it back to the work that we do at Learning is Leadership. And part of what we do is try to help our participants connect to the cost of behaviors that are unhelpful. Because doing that, it wasn't until I connected to the cost of my behaviors that I was motivated to do anything differently. So, I mean, like, really, I'm talking about it kind of lightly, and I have space and distance from it, but I was emotionally connected to these costs. Like, this wasn't okay with me. This isn't the person that I want to be in my life. This is not how I want to show up. So, I mean, we really want to encourage folks, invite folks to sit in this and be in the discomfort of these behaviors, because it's not okay. It's not fun. And so all that to say, number one, making that emotional connection to the cost, if that doesn't outweigh my need to protect, improve, and all the stuff that my ego is doing, I'm not going to change without that. So that's number one. I can stay in that space of Jamie did this and looking at all the external things, but it's not until I go inside and I really understand, like, hey, what is it that I want for myself? Is this the kind of space that I want to create? Like, I need this level of self-honesty. I need to really hold up a mirror and check in with myself so that I understand, oh, wait, I'm actually about this other thing. And I don't want to gloss over how I'm contributing to this environment that doesn't lead to excellence. And so that's the first step in figuring out how to interrupt it. Without that, without being grounded and anchored in why these behaviors are no longer okay with me, I can easily fall into them again. So repeat offense. Yep. And B, it's going to be an uphill battle to do the work of interrupting these tendencies otherwise.
Yeah.
My ego is convincing me that they work and that they're keeping me safe. Right. So that's not the case. So
yeah. And I just want to say, and in reality, what your ego did was kept you basically in 9 months. It took 9 months to actually get something done that you thought, ordinarily would be 1 to 3 months. So your ego thought it was helping you out, but in the end, the cost of 9 months of this and how unhappy you must have been for at least the lead up to that and large portions of that. I just think it's interesting. And I love how you said there, Lisa, about it's uncomfortable to look at these things, and be in the discomfort of self-honesty and looking at our own ways we contribute to dysfunction. But you can be uncomfortable reviewing it and looking at it, or you can be uncomfortable for 9 months dealing with the challenges, So pick your discomfort. Not the discomfort that leads to change, transformation, and better ways of doing things.
That's spot on.
Yeah. So anything you want to say about why it might be useful to interrupt this tendency? You've said a lot about that, but I just want to invite you if there's more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really where we're headed. Like, that's part 2 of the conversation about what's possible, right? Like, this shift from dysfunction to excellence, we can't get to the excellence until we're really clear about this and we, draw a line in the sand. So that's what it took. I've experienced that in this situation and many others since that, with the tools. That's the work that we do in the seminar. So for those of you that have yet to experience our work, connect to why this will be valuable for you and for your teams, and what's possible. So definitely this is exactly where we're headed in the conversation.
Yeah, that's really great. So happy to open it up to anyone that's participating for questions. We have time for maybe, I don't know, 1 or 2 questions. And here's a question that comes to mind just about, I know that I had this thought when I was first presented with this concept. Sometimes you just have an instinct that someone isn't to be trusted or trustworthy. And, we just have a gut feeling, or there's just something there. And are you saying that we trust somebody even though they're a bad actor, or, maybe there is something going on under the surface? What do you have? I mean, that's a question that we might be able to touch on here.
Yeah, I have thoughts. So okay. So let me first say, my instincts about Jamie were judgment. So I would even start with like assessing, what do we mean by instincts? Right? So that's already one thing. Oftentimes our instincts are judgments or biases or something else. Not saying all the time, but that's already one little place to check. But if there is something, that's letting me know, like, okay, there's a real red flag here. I think that what we're saying is, I don't have to be engaged in behaviors that make it worse or contribute in ways that, that are fundamentally dysfunctional for that dynamic. So it doesn't mean that because there is a bad actor, and we don't know if they are or not, so let's hold that together.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that I then need to make them bad. How is that helping? Right. And I don't know what's going on for them. I have no idea what I perceive as their behavior. Could they be in response to something? Is there something going on for them that I can't see under the surface? Like, maybe I could have curiosity and compassion. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think what you're really talking about is, what do you care about? Like, when you're in that work setting that you were describing, you were probably in that business, again, like you said, you wanted to have fun. It's fun to work and have like a connected, collaborated team. You want to have good results where, you're putting up the numbers that the parent company wants to see. And maybe there's just a greater vision that you have, or a sense of purpose about being in that business. And people go into that kind of industry because it is such hard work, out of a deep passion, I think, for food, hospitality. I've heard when you talk about that, Lisa, I hear that in you. And so in this situation with Jamie, maybe you were definitely, we say, trust people have instincts. I love that. Well, first of all, double check. Are they instincts or are they judgments? And then the other thing to consider is, what do I care about even more? Yes, I may need to come into conversations with this other person, in this case, Jamie, with awareness, and that I have this ambivalence towards them. I can test that out over time, but what do I care about so that I can behave in ways that are positively impacting the rest of the team and this goal, that speaks to my heart.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of good things that we could talk about here, and I will just put a little teaser in here for our next call. As we mentioned, there would be two parts to this conversation. So we've talked about how it is that we make others bad, not with any moral equivalency, but also just ways that we disempower and discourage other people versus bringing out the best in them. And so what I've asked Lisa to do, and she's prepared to do this in a month when we're together, is I asked her if she had a magic wand and could go back in time and do it over again with Jamie, knowing what she knows now, what would she do differently? And that's going to point us in the direction that we're going to. What do you do instead when you're recognizing these tendencies to make others bad? What do you do instead? So that's where we're going on September 6th, and we invite you to join us here. Meanwhile, here's an invitation for you, if you're listening or watching this, as a little homework assignment. Start noticing the various ways that you might be making others bad. Maybe you're quietly judging them. Maybe you're withholding information. Just kind of start noticing without judgment. This is a practice of self-honesty and observation. Totally worth it if that's something you're willing to take on. I think it will benefit you in the next conversation we have.
Yeah. And I'll just say too, if you're curious about the work that we do, I'll put a link in the chat for our website. We have a couple of seminars that are coming up. Our next personal mastery seminar for our ego-free leadership program is happening in November. It's such a wonderful time of transformation. And so we actually help folks to shift and break through this, right? I'm talking about it kind of high level, using my own example, but the workshop and the seminars are designed to really help you deep dive and understand the inner workings of your ecosystem so that you can really interrupt this behavior and get to the other side. So we'll put the links in the chat. Reach out to us. You want to find out more about the seminar? Do you want to find out, you want to explore the tendencies that you're noticing? Take Linda up on that invitation. What else, Linda? What else should we let the people know before we wrap?
I think we should say thank you so much for coming and being here with us in this. And I think you've done a great summation there. So let's just say happy Friday to one and all. And yeah, nice being with you.
All right. See you all next time. Take care for now.